We all take good care of the things that matter: our homes, our pets, our cars. Are you doing the same for your brain? Acting early to protect brain health may help reduce the risk of dementia from conditions like Alzheimer's disease. Studies have found that up to 45% of dementia cases may be prevented or delayed by managing risk factors you can change. Make brain health a priority. Ask your doctor about your risk factors and for a cognitive assessment. Learn more at brainhealthmatters.com.
This is a real good story about Bronx and his dad, Ryan, real United Airlines customers.
We were returning home, and one of the flight attendants asked Bronx if he wanted to see the flight deck and meet Captain Andrew.
I got to sit in the driver's seat.
I grew up in an aviation family, and seeing Bronx kind of reminded me of myself when I was that age.
That's Andrew, a real United pilot.
These small interactions can shape a kid's future.
It felt like I was the captain.
Allowing my son to see the flight deck will stick with us forever.
That's how good leads the way.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You are now entering the Pseudoarchaeology Podcast, a show that uncovers what's fact, what's fake, and what's fun in the crazy world of pseudoarchaeology. Hello and welcome to the Pseudoarchaeology Podcast, episode 172. I am your host, Dr. Andrew Kinkella, and tonight, a review of the book, Sex is a Spectrum. There is only one thing wrong with Sex is a Spectrum. It's not. All right, guys. Well, welcome back. Hey, how's it going? Always a joy to do this. Now, tonight, as per usual, we'll take a bit of a left turn, although not too far. I want to talk about the book Sex is a Spectrum. And the reason why is I saw a post somewhere, and honestly, I forgot where I saw it. Let's say it's Facebook, is it some sort of social media place? I will say, although I'm obviously very important as a podcast host, I don't go on social media that much. I look, at like Facebook or Instagram or whatever every so often, but I don't really actively post there much at all, just because it's just not really my thing. But I saw this post about sort of the sex binary and this kind of thing, gender and whatnot. And, they get really angry and over the top in the social medias, taking you down the relative rabbit holes that you shouldn't waste your time on. But there were a group of anthropologists who were very serious about this stuff. And they were like, hey, if you want to know about the sex differences between men and women, you need to read this book, right? And so I had heard of it. Sex is a Spectrum by Agustin Fuentes. It's relatively recent. I want to say it came out like maybe 2 years ago or something like that. It might even be a little bit less. A year ago? It's recent. And so I said, okay. And I actually read it. Actually, to be honest, I got the Audible book version of it and I listened to it. And I think shocked is the wrong term. I wasn't listening to it going, oh my God. Because I already know this world, being a anthropology professor, I teach evolution and sex and gender and all that kind of stuff in bioanthro classes. But, the short answer, to reveal everything within the first 2 minutes, I disagree really strongly with this book. And I thought I would just take some time and go through it. Again, I listened to the whole thing, beginning to end. And we would just talk about it, and let's not get all our feathers in a ruffle. Let's be relaxed and kind of go through this. And before I start, let's do the part where I sugarcoat the pill and say that Agustin Fuentes, as a writer and as a speaker, is really good. He is a very good writer. I really appreciate just his construction of sentences and his organization of stuff. He can make things understandable when he needs to. More on that later. And in terms of his speaking voice, I've seen a presentation of his somewhere. Again, anthropology is a really small world. But in terms of his kind of ability to talk and to present to people, he's great. He does a really good job. And I have to say, he seems like a nice dude. Like, hey, Augustine, I would always get a drink with you, man. And after this, I'm sure I'm buying. So anyway, I just want to sort of state that off the front. This is not here as me being like, oh, this horrible person who should be canceled, right? I hate it. You guys know I hate all that crap. I just like talking about these kind of ideas. Anyway, as we get into the book, in the beginning, and I'm just going to cruise through, I made a bunch of notes to myself. So this is just, I won't announce the chapters or anything. I'm just sort of going kind of idea by idea. First, he kind of starts out using animals as reference to humans, right? Sort of comparing certain animals in the animal kingdom to humans, and his overall idea that he is going to push again and again and one more time. Again, if you're writing a book, you're going to push your central theme. It is sex is not binary, right? Sex is a spectrum, meaning the idea of male and female is the wrong way to look at things. We need to look much more in sort of a smooth transition from one to the other, and it's not really easy to kind of demarcate between the two. Thinking of them as a binary is wrong, right? According to him, that's his big thing. It's really what the whole book's about. So he talks about early life, early evolution. Life begins asexually, right, with just cells reproducing through splitting, And then he's like, hey, then it goes onward evolutionarily. He talks about how old biologists are wrong about how they talk about this. Now, already when I see that, my antenna goes up. I don't like it when researchers just start to bitch about older researchers, and just go, oh, well, they're older, so they're wrong. Old ideas can still be right. Just because an idea is new doesn't make it right. So he kind of sets up oversimplified ideas like, females are designed for caregiving and males are designed for impregnating. Now, already there's a lot of truth in that, as we understand, living here as humans on Earth, but there are cliches that come from that too. He talks about that there's diversity in parenting, some guys parent more and some women parent less. That's true. There's diversity in that. And he sort of doubles down and says a strict binary is super bad. I would already say, well, what about kind of an unstrict binary? Or using the line I like, that human sex is strongly binary. That's what I would say. And then he talks about the idea of overlap between men and women. More on that later. But I find that argument to be really weak. The idea of like differences in size of men and women, this kind of thing, and the idea that they overlap. So what? That has nothing to do with the binary nature of sex. It can't be that all men are 6 feet tall and all women are 5 feet tall and there's nothing in between. It's just a silly argument, right? And it's kind of a waste of our time. He gives examples of animals in the world that like change their sex. Many of you guys have heard this kind of stuff before, right? And that's true. There are like fish that change their sex, but they change their sex from one binary sex to the other one. There's not like a intermediary. There's not a third, right? Underneath all this, we can, if we really need to define sex underneath it all, females produce eggs and males produce sperm. Now, already people on his side would say I was being extremely reductionist, right? Meaning that, let's be honest, I'm making it simple. Now, just because something is simple, it doesn't mean it's wrong, right? And, academics can often overthink something to death. As he goes on, he talks about there's, no one single way to be a male or female. That is, of course, correct. You can be different. There's different ways of being. But now, here's another key component here that he does, I think, really poorly. There is gender and there is sex, right? Sex is the biological difference between men and women, right? Which I see as strongly binary, and he doesn't. He talks about it as a spectrum. Gender is like the cultural construction of who we are. It's like what we wear. It's how we do our hair. It's the kind of job we do. It's the things we like. It's the people we like, right? It's human choice. Those are separate. Sex is biological. Gender is cultural. So gender is a total spectrum. You can do whatever you want in gender. That's where the spectrum is. But to bleed it into biology is foolish and just untrue. They are two different things. And that's okay, right? But I find that as we go on, he's going to sell that as sort of intertwined, and it's not. He goes onward to say that we are shaped as much by culture and choice as by biology. And that is true in general, but not at the cellular level, right? And this is how these arguments continue. You know, I don't know what to say. And then there's a part in here fairly early where he blames colonialism and Christianity for the binary and for the erasure of transgender people. That's just not, talk about reductionist. There are many different cultures with many different ways of living, and many cultures see only a classic binary. They do, while others don't. Now, in terms of seeing binaries or not, this is all gender stuff. One of the most fun things I have, like teaching a cultural anthro class, is the day on gender when we talk about defined third genders. Defined third genders totally exist in other societies. That is a real thing, right? We don't have it in like the United States culture, not thoroughly defined like they do in others, some others, right? But that's not a sex thing. That's not a defined third sex. It is a defined third gender. And that's okay. And that's interesting to sort of blame the idea that all other cultures had some other belief system before Christianity came in. That's not fair. It just depends. That's not worth our time. And this is where he adds the idea of gender sex, right? This singular kind of term, that this is the best way to go forward, not to divide them. That's what he has to do to prove this, right? He has to mix it because the biology is very much against him. He moves on, talks about primates and how social primates are, that some male primates do some caretaking, which is fine, but their sex is still binary. But males do some caretaking. They totally do. There's arguments he makes that you could easily spin out and make fun of. Like he talks about how size matters in this almost more than the biology. You know, the larger is different than smaller. So it's like, okay, are small guys more womanly than large guys? Are larger women less womanly than small women? You know, it's, oh man, you're making it easy for me. Then he talks about orangutans. This is one of his first really awful examples. He talks about how there's one female version of orangutans and two male versions. There's like a larger male orangutan and a smaller male orangutan, right? So there's three sort of versions total. And he makes a big deal out of this. There's three bodies. That's his quote. There's three bodies of orangutans. That's true. There are three bodies of orangutans. Of course, there's only two sexes, though. Again, I'm like, what you see as you go through this is oddly, he kind of proves the binary while arguing against the binary because the arguments are so bad. That's an awful argument. I mean, the males talking about sort of cliche maleness, males can fight and parent at the same time. I mean, I don't know. He talks about the hunter-gatherer cliche. You know, in early societies, the idea that man the hunter and women the gatherer, yes, that is a cliche. And yes, it is overdone. And yes, you do see a total variation in gender roles, meaning some women hunt, some men gather, some do both, some do a little. But that has nothing to do with biology, right? That's okay. That we can talk, it's much more worth our time to talk about, if we want to talk about a spectrum, the spectrum of gender roles, because that's intrinsically interesting, right? One of the things I do with my students is, for the girls, I'm like, okay, girls, what's the most quote unquote manly thing you do? And then guys, what's the most quote unquote womanly thing you do, right? These are gender choices. And it also gets to deeper layers of it's easier for women to admit that any sort of classically male thing they do versus it's harder for the guys because for the guys it's seen socially as a sign of weakness. And you see, we can get into all that and have a fantastic, interesting conversation about gender norms in the United States, but not waste our time on some dumb idea that biology is not binary. Yeah, he doubles down on the height averages where there's an overlapping of men and women's heights. Yes, of course there is. At this point, this stuff, you guys, you kind of see how this reminds me of my day job here at the Pseudoarchaeology podcast, talking about stuff that is a very poorly supported idea that somebody just preaches over and over. And it kind of makes you tired over time because you just see the holes in it and it gets boring, right? It was a bit of a chore for me to get through it. Although, as I've said before, Agustin Fuentes is a pretty damn good writer, way better than Graham Hancock and those other guys. So good for him. When we return, let's continue talking about the book, Sex is a Spectrum. Hello, and welcome back to the Pseudoarchaeology Podcast, episode 172, I believe, and we are discussing Agustin Fuentes' Sex is a Spectrum, his book. And it makes me feel bad, like, criticizing other anthropology types, because it is tough to be an academic in this world. And you'll hear me say this again and again, I really wish Agustin Fuentes well. Again, I am not kidding. I would totally get lunch with him and I would totally buy, and I would totally just chill and talk and relax and enjoy his company. Critiquing him, this reminds me of when I did the one on the Cerruti Mastodon site. Because I had to critique actual archaeologists, because the idea of the Cerruti Mastodon site at 130,000 years old, being an actual site where human beings were, was really terrible. And they had really awful data, but I felt bad. And I have that same feeling here. And with that said, I'm at the point where here's, I think, the second really terrible example. The first one, as I just talked about, was the orangutan thing. He tries to argue, and this is weak. This is a weak, hard to follow argument, but basically that females are as strong as males. I don't know if he says that exactly, but his argument is that, you see, females in culture, they're just taught that they can't be as strong as males. So they're just restricted. That was his word. They're just restricted. That's a terrible argument. Terrible. Females are not just restricted. The idea would be if we really pushed females forward, then it would raise to some sort of parity with males and females. No. Exhibit A that I would bring in, Venus and Serena Williams. I don't find them, the tennis player sisters, right? I don't find them restricted. I wouldn't say, Serena Williams, I mean, she's okay. But wouldn't she be better if she wasn't so if she wasn't so restricted? See, it's oh man. And then he switches gears and talks about how measuring hormone levels is unscientific. What? And I know these arguments, you guys. Again, I do have a PhD in anthropology. Ooh, look at me. But I know the arguments on their side, but I also know how silly they are. Here's a great quote. Quote, bodies with testes tend to have much more testosterone. Oh, you don't say. And then this one, here's another one. Pregnancy is not a binary. Okay. And this is where, it's like, oh, let's change the language to humans who become pregnant. Let's erase women out of that. Let's just, I don't know. Can I become pregnant? I can't. It's cruel to say that somehow that women, it's just this thing. It's not really a defining aspect of being a woman. It is. He talks about how organs aren't binary. Okay. Sex is, but organs aren't. That's fine. It talks a little about chromosomal variations. Thankfully, not a ton, because that can get into the weeds really fast. So I appreciate that he didn't. That can be like a whole deal. The idea of XXYs and all that kind of stuff. Now, the flat answer is obviously what we would call normal. And he sort of begs that, like, oh, are you going to say it? Are you going to say what's normal? Yes, I'm going to say it. I don't think this hurts feelings to say that the normal layout is women are X and men are XY, right? That is normal. If you are not X or XY, that doesn't mean you're an abnormal, terrible human. It just means that you are a rare case, right? And that's fine. Again, there are such things as XY, and XXY is still a male, but it's somebody who's going to show like kind of feminine traits a little bit more in this kind of thing. And there are others. There are other variations on this. We also want to realize that they are rare, right? This is a very small percentage, which I think he talks about too, I think. So that's okay, right? We don't want to sort of mask what's normal or everyday or super common in language, trying to be overly politically correct, right? We just want to say what we mean, and that's all right. And we're not here to be cruel. He also talks about how females are not more choosy than males for sex. What? And that men are not more promiscuous. Go on any dating app. Stuff like that. Like, where I'm trying, man. But you can't say stuff like that. And again, I know his wiggly out little meaning, what he means, because if you're trying to argue for a spectrum, you're going to be like, well, men as a defined category are not more promiscuous because there's no real such thing as men versus women. It's just a spectrum. It's like, no. Yes, women are more choosy. Again, do I have to say this? And then in his final chapter, he switches gears a little bit to basically say how terrible people are who talk about the binary. So I am quoting from him, I am ignorant, harmful, and I make others suffer because I choose to talk about the sex binary. Really? I'm ignorant? I'm just showing ignorance? I've read your book. I'm a PhD anthropology professor. I know the arguments. I know the data. I know the facts. I know how academia treats this kind of stuff because at this point, socially, they're too chicken to just tell the data-driven truth. More on that later. So I find this to be a really bad left turn that he makes, to say that, well, if you don't believe me, you're ignorant and you cause harm and suffering. Should I end every podcast of mine like that? And by the way, guys, if you didn't believe my podcast, you're ignorant and you cause harm and suffering. Not making friends. He goes on, he talks about that nobody's found the gay gene. There's no such thing as a gay gene. That's fine. That's true. Talks about how heterosexual is seen as normal. It is, but that's okay. It's also okay to be homosexual or any of the other choices in your gender-driven world, right? The fact that there are homosexual people, that makes no difference in terms of the sex binary. And that's fine. He talks a little more about how I think we caretake that basically children are taken care of by multiple people. You can have an entire family who takes care of a child. That's fine. But again, that has nothing to do with the sex binary. You can have men and women who work together as a family to take care of children. And that's a good thing. He has this thing about too many male mice being used and there needs to be more female mice used. I have no problem with that in experiments and stuff. I find that he also has, here's maybe the third, really terrible example. He says, quote, testosterone is not categorized as a male or female hormone. That's false. Anywhere you look it up on Wikipedia, look it up in the dictionary. It's going to say testosterone is the primary male sex hormone. That moment if you're saying something like, well, testosterone is not really male or female, and what he means is, yes, females have some testosterone in their bodies too, just like males have some estrogen, like that kind of stuff. But who's causing the ignorance, harm, and suffering? Saying testosterone is not categorized as a male or female hormone. What planet did we just land on? Like, come on. He ends with a couple examples, a sports example of a person who their body is genetically a male, but they competed as a female. This is a tougher one. It was the athlete Caster Semenya. This wasn't nearly so obvious like the Leah Thomas situation in swimming, right? Where a biological male is competing against biological females. This is a biological male, but it is a person who has a condition that does make them a very rare instance. By arguing, I think that trans women don't necessarily have an edge in sports, which is, again, just silly. Of course they do. He sort of argues that, trans women who just sit on their couch and smoke cigarettes don't necessarily have an edge. Yes, but if they want to have an edge, they have it. If their body has been bathed in testosterone as they grew up, they have an edge. Period. But then he sort of argues that it's not really that important. And then, of course, ends with the binary is wrong and harmful. And, there you go. Oh, so what to do with this? There's the book. It's short. Again, it's well written and very well spoken. I give it to him for his audiobook. I think he did a great job. But the idea is, this idea that sex is not a binary, it's just wrong, And to me, what this is, it's like a thought experiment gone really wrong, where a professor put like two grad students or two teams, and you're like, team one, you're going to argue for the sex binary. Team two, you're going to argue that sex is a spectrum. Now, actually, if professors did that to grad students, that would be great. But unfortunately, I don't think they would. I think they would, in terms of how academia runs today, in most anthropology departments, they would only assign this book. And if anyone even said sex is binary, they would be like outcast as being a harmful, ignorant individual, which is helpful to no one. But again, it's like a thought experiment, but they just kept going, and you're like, hey, no, Professor Fuentes, this was just a thought experiment. He's like, no, I got this. I'm going to bring this one home. You're like, no, this was just to think. He's like, no, I'm going to write a book about it. You're like, oof. When we return, my final thoughts on sex is a spectrum. Hello, and welcome back to the Pseudoarchaeology Podcast, episode 172. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Kinkella, and we are wrapping up our ideas on Sex is a Spectrum by Agustin Fuentes. What would I say here? In terms of teaching and in terms of learning, if you want to know about evolution, sex differences, this kind of stuff, there are two books that I really like. One in particular. First, you have Richard Dawkins' Greatest Show on Earth. And the academics out there, they all of a sudden don't like Richard Dawkins anymore, even though he's a fantastic biologist who's been doing this stuff for like 50 years. But it's all about evolution. And my favorite is actually Jerry Coyne's Why Evolution is True. Both of these guys have had sort of attempted cancellations, by the academic world because they, do regular science. But the Richard Dawkins book, Greatest Show on Earth, I don't like quite as much because it actually harps on religion a little too much, right? It's kind of anti-religion. And even though I'm not a religious person, I'm not here to like go to town on that. I find that that aspect of it can leave like students and readers kind of cold. The one I love, though, Jerry Coyne's Why Evolution is True, that is an excellent book. If you're just like, I want to know about evolution, I want to know how all this stuff works, I want to learn, his book is fantastic. right? So, boy, order it today. You can find it online used, like really cheap, because it was, I think, a bestseller. It's fantastic. It is fantastic in the exact way that this book is not, right? I think there's no comparison between the two. This book, at the, Sex is a Spectrum, at the end is basically telling you that you're a terrible person. They are overtly saying you're an ignorant person who causes harm if you don't believe what I'm saying, right? And so what I'm here to tell you is, look, you can believe in the sex binary and still be a good person very easily. It's fine, right? You can do that. And that's what we always did up until a handful of years ago when, out of nowhere, this kind of became a thing. I'm really worried that anthropologists actually take this stuff seriously in terms of, I really think that there's a lot of anthropologists out there that would use Sex is a Spectrum as a textbook instead of Why Evolution is True. That is a horrible disservice to students, right? They are getting an extremely one-sided approach full of really poorly argued points and are just going to become confused to the point where most of this proves, he's trying to prove there's no binary with multiple examples of the binary while saying it's not the binary. It's just, it'll be very confusing for somebody who's a serious thinker. I think this book is a cautionary tale of our times. I find it in its own way to be a spectacular failure, like a laughable, oh my God, he wrote what? Kind of failure. And I hope in time we can all have a laugh. I am not here again to cancel Agustin Fuentes. I think he seems cool. I don't want him to lose his job or any of this stuff. I'm not gonna put angry rants on Twitter about him or anything. Quite the opposite, right? I want him to keep his job. I want him to keep writing, and he's a good writer. And I want him to just be able to take this note and be like, hey, man, you really screwed up on this one. Maybe your next one be better, And hey, let's be honest. I could write a crappy book like this. It could happen, right? And I wouldn't want people to try and kick me out of wherever I'm in. Just kind of share a quick hug and be like, hey, man, it's all right. Can't win them all. That's where I land on this. The only way something as spectacularly wrong as this can be made is by the siloing of academia, meaning that how academia runs today is it's extremely left-leaning, right? To the point where this kind of thing is cheered on by a pile of sycophants and there's no real criticism. What this book needs is what I like to call the friend. What Augustine needs is the friend. I'll be his friend. And I mean that in seriousness. And what I mean by the friend, I might have talked about this in other times. I think this is so important that, after he showed his draft of this book to a bunch of anthropologists in the AAAs, that's the American Anthropological Association, and they all went, yay, you're so brave and so incredible. After that evening, his good friend needs to come to him and go, Augustine, this book's really stupid, dude. It's real bad. This is a bad move, man. And I'm telling you why. I'm telling you as a friend, right? Because I care about you, man. And I don't want you to make wrong moves like this. That's what needed to happen. And it's just, I find this thing honestly to be so bad that it's almost an anthropological study of itself. It's an anthropological study of the time we live in. How did this make it to print like this? Why weren't there any barriers to stop him, or at least have a moment to rethink? Again, I don't care that it's published. What I do care about is it's just not any good and a waste of everyone's time. And this is from a smart person. I don't want him to waste his time on this. I want him to do smart stuff. To kind of wrap it up, being the host of the Pseudoarchaeology podcast and having seen so many things by like Graham Hancock and Eric von Däniken and the whole host of the pseudoarchaeology people who I have to deal with all the time, I've noticed so many similarities. And I just wanted to end up with a handful of real strong similarities here, specifically in the realm of logical fallacies. Which logical fallacies does Agustin Fuentes lean on in order to attempt to get others on his side? First, the straw man. He does that. He misrepresents binary data, right? He misrepresents data that shows that the binary is super strong. And unfortunately, there's so much data that shows that that humans are strongly binary that he kind of has to say that data proves his point when it totally doesn't. But it's it's a misrepresentation, right? So there's straw man arguments throughout this. And of course, to go with it, there's a ton of cherry picking, where the idea of just taking little bits of data and leaving the major data that shows you're incorrect. This one's almost hard to see sometimes here, though, because beyond cherry picking, sometimes it's just false statements said boldly. I don't even know if that's a logical fallacy. It's just like, I'll say the wrong thing, like testosterone is neither male nor female, that kind of stuff. You're like, what? He definitely doesn't appeal to emotion with the idea that if you don't believe me, you cause harm, right? You're a bad person. He doesn't do ad hominem arguments that much, meaning overtly saying others are bad people. Not really. It does. I would call the harm thing a little bit more appeal to emotion. I would say that others in the anthropological community use ad hominem arguments all the time for anyone who goes against this. He does a bit of the bandwagon fallacy. Well, researchers believe. Wait, what researchers? Who are you talking about? Well, most of us believe. And he does the purity play too. Well, no serious anthropologists, modern anthropologists, we all believe in that sex is a spectrum. No, we don't. He does kind of a version of the circular argument where it's like sex is a spectrum because sex is a spectrum. Because it's a spectrum. That's why. Well, because it is. Right? He does that. But I think the big one, the big logical fallacy he does is actually the red herring. Because this book is riddled with terrible examples, useless side stories, right? Those are red herrings. It's like, no, look away from the sex binary. Look at this story about orangutans. You're like, that still proves the sex binary. Wait, look at this story about fish. That still proves the sex binary, right? Sort of never-ending red herrings to get you away from the fact that he has no support. There's no point here. So where does that leave us? I really hope that the academic world gets back on their feet and, again, doesn't like shame Agustin Fuentes or something like that. Shakes it off over a weekend, and goes, man, a little bit wrong on that one. That's fine. Moving on, right? And then in their classes uses stuff like why evolution is true instead of sex is a spectrum. I would also even say I would love it if at the grad school level, they made the grad students read both books and then argue back and forth and not just make it where you virtue signal about how much you like sex as a spectrum, but really go back and forth, really think, really dive deep. I think that would be great. But in the end, what we have here in the book, Sex is a Spectrum, is a grand idea with flimsy, cherry-picked evidence signifying nothing. And with that, I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for listening to the Pseudoarchaeology podcast. Please like and subscribe wherever you like and subscribe. And if you have questions for me, Dr. Andrew Kinkella, feel free to reach out using the links below or go to my YouTube channel, Kinkella Teaches Archaeology. See you guys next time.
The Archaeology Podcast Network is 10 years old this year. Our executive producer is Ashley Airy, our social media coordinator is Matilda Siebrecht, and our chief editor is Rachel Roden. The Archaeology Podcast Network was co-founded by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in 2014 and is part of Culturo Media and DigTech LLC.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.